Hello, welcome to Critical Line Item. My name's Tom Ravlick. Thank you for joining me for this particular podcast. Now, one of the things that you're going to see a lot more of is conversations about the role of artificial intelligence and the way in which large companies and governments and others use it to deal with problems. Now, one of the areas of great interest that various think tanks and others have been looking at is how artificial intelligence can be used in different forms in terms of detecting conspiracy theories on large through large bodies of data, such as websites like the ones managed by Google or Meta, i.e. Facebook, and in other ways in terms of how disinformation and misinformation can be weeded out. It can be a little bit complicated, but I've got someone who is very good at this, doing the doctoral researcher in cybersecurity, who's going to sort of help sort this out. Jean Linis-Dinco is doing a doctoral is doing a doctorate, and I think she's just about done, and she'll take us through some of the issues with AI and various things that might come up in her research. Jean, thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Now, we know there's a lot of talk about disinformation and misinformation today, in part because of the fact that it has never been so easy to get published. And the bar has been the barrier to entry for publication has been lowered by social media. So the traditional means of things being edited, things being verified through few hands no longer is the case. What are some of the problems that you're observing as you look at this area from a research standpoint and more generally?
There's definitely the problem on the open or too much information with regards to or too much crafting of information in regards to social media, and that's we've seen in a lot of elections recently, not just I don't know, even in my home country, the Philippines. It's been a total disaster because users are being bombarded with information from here and there, and they don't know where that information is coming from. Some people pretend that the information is legitimate. Some people even consider that information is valid because it was spoken by someone who they just been following online. So that's the validation of this kind of information usually escapes us because we don't know where it starts, where it came from, and where it was going. And as far as we've seen in many elections globally, it usually always finds something to target, and that is the creation of the in-group and the out-group, and that is the protection of the national identity that the narrative on social media is trying to protect. We're saying we are being attacked, for example, by refugees. We've seen that in India with the Rohingya crisis, saying that the recent refugee crisis from Myanmar, for example, was a deliberate attack from Pakistan to turn the country into an Islamic republic. So that's and in the Philippines, one main concern is that they're trying to want to bring back the Philippines into its old glory. Well, I don't know what glory they're talking about, but it's always about protecting or preserving some national identity, which they're framing as it's being attacked.
It's interesting you say that because there's another thing that goes on when these messages are being sent out. We assume that it's being done by people within a particular jurisdiction initially. There's also the phenomenon, isn't there, of bad state actors leveraging that and trying to amplify discord and dissent within a particular environment. A bit like some of the stuff that went on during the US election back in 2020, when some of the research that I read found not all, well, not a huge number in terms of percentage, but enough to be of concern of the posts from countries like Saudi Arabia and China, etc., getting involved in that kind of thing. How much is that a concern to you when you're looking at this area from a perspective of research?
Sorry, you mean? Sorry, I didn't quite.
The involvement of other people, other global actors in a domestic dispute.
Right. Okay. Well, that particular thing is a different field of study by itself, and it merits a lot of more scholarly attention. But I feel like because I've actually written a paper on how small islands, for instance, because I'm from the Philippines, so I hope that it's okay. I use it as a benchmark of everything when I talk about. So I've written a paper which is about how small islands interact with this kind of changing global order, if I could call it that, because recent in Chinese investments in the Philippines, for example, has raised an alarm in the human rights community, particularly back home. Non-profits and NGOs have been raising alarms because the Philippines has been opening more investment for power grids, or even which could lead to a lot of democratic problems. And well, I'm not saying that it is it is bad, but I'm not saying that this kind of investments are awful or anything. But what I'm trying to say is that small countries like my home country, or not even just small countries in size, but small country politically, who do not have much voice in the international space, usually find themselves between two colliding, or in a collision between two rocks. And in that regard, it is really about finding the right spot so you don't get crushed. And it's really scary times, but at this time we cannot with recent elections of Philippine President Duterte in 2016, he has been very vocal that the Philippines should go or move away from the U.S. as its allies, and be more of Sino friendly. And since then, we have seen higher levels of hacking attacks in our government websites, because maybe the other government wants to know if the Philippines really is saying the truth, that it wants to be an ally with them. So majority of the attacks that we've seen back home are coming from China itself. So that's another thing. It's about really finding a balance. There's nothing wrong with having good friends with your neighbors, or an Asian superpower by itself, but it's really about finding balance. And it's really scary if you're a small country like my home country, because you always find yourself needing to choose between the two. because if not, you get squashed.
It's an interesting period in global affairs for that reason. There are, I mean, that naturally leads into the kind of work you're looking at in your doctoral research. These things take a lot of time and a lot of work. What are you focused on?
So my main research is analyzing how it's on cyber propaganda in analyzing how cyber propaganda travels from one country to another in the context of the global south. So that is Myanmar, India, and Bangladesh, particularly concerning about the Rohingya crisis in 2017, which has been proven to be quite massive issue in that part of the globe. So my main argument in my study is that we always assume that the digital disruption is a great equalizer, as I've said. We've seen in many parts of the globe where social media has become a tool for an emancipatory tool for many people in the grassroots, as they've allowed themselves or find themselves people to. Sorry, my dog is just Heidi. No. So so right. Where was I? Yeah, so we've always said it was such a great equalizer because they will emancipate it, and but there's not really much research conducted on that, particularly with the Egyptian revolution. We've seen that
Yes.
the effects of social media was more likely just an after effect of a grassroots movement. But anyway, so there's a similar view that found that the Chinese netizens, for example, in Weibo, in the issue of government corruption in China, had wider variations as opposed to how the Chinese media and the Chinese government has portrayed the story. So the frames that we've seen online were competing directly against the authority or the legitimacy of their government. But in the case of Myanmar, India, and Bangladesh, it is pretty much the same thing as we're seeing back in Western countries. I would say the emancipatory effects of social media are contingent to the political environment of the country in question. But this also means that if a country has restricted political rights and freedom, the positive effects of social media as a tool for change is amplified. But this is also because social media operates as the main, if not the only, outlet for expressing political opinion. But this kind of assertions somehow contradict the overarching narratives that online communication is emancipatory, and it does quite raise a point of inquiry on the hegemonic role of social media in democratic spaces. So by concentrating on the functions of social media as, how would I say, as a radical instrument for change in authoritarian states, scholars like myself we've overlooked the potential of social media to be used for propaganda purposes in countries who claim to be democratic but not really established democracy. And that is the point of departure of my thesis. So I try to explore whether national interests and government voices affect how citizens in their own country understand an unfamiliar event, such as conflict or foreign war or even a refugee crisis.
But you raised an important point that, and you're right, we don't often focus on certain issues that relate to the regime in a country. We do focus on I guess, You talk about the emancipatory aspects of social media. We forget something, I think, and please let me know if you disagree, that technology is agnostic, right? Technology is agnostic. So if we start from that position, you can have a revolutionary movement, but you can also have a movement or activity that counters that revolution, using the same technology that those people that are engaged in revolution or a particular movement are using. Um, do you think that we forget in the moment when people are swept up in the notion of sort of revolution and how the ability to communicate and spread ideas had been sort of facilitated by social media, that they forget the people they're fighting against have the same capacity?
Right. Well, I would go back to what Kranzberg, First Law of Technology, says, that technology is neither good nor bad, nor is it neutral. So we cannot. I don't believe that it's particularly neutral or agnostic. It's quite a contrary, you know. So because calling it neutral is the same narrative that marketers and big corporations are using to avoid accountability, because they're saying that it depends on how the users use it. But that also removes or moves accountability, or shifts the accountability from big tech companies to the people, so that if things happen, if things go bad, the consumer are the first one to blame. But I think that just that all algorithms or all technology are political, and it is quite an epitome of privilege to say otherwise. So let me just explain that. So technology, for instance, we've seen a lot of technology that has negatively affected people in the global south, as opposed to their counterparts in the global north. And we've seen that in many kinds of technology, even the release of for example, of Facebook, for instance, where it became a very good tool to see to some friends in Harvard. But now we're now seeing how it damaged lives of hundreds and hundreds of people, or thousands of people in Myanmar and in Ethiopia, because it's now being used as a tool to promote propaganda. So from issues related to privacy, right to equality, right and non-discrimination, freedom of thought over surveillance, technology has really affected global South people in a manner that we would not have seen elsewhere, because the technology designed for the global North people usually does not translate well when just exported to the global South. So let me go to this research on inferential technology, or the recognition methods to detect people based on their photographs or online behavior, which is pretty much born out of the hyper-capitalist society that seeks to micro-target people so that they would buy their products. So tech companies, now that have access to their consumers' inner desires, political leanings, preferences, likes and dislikes, emotions, which 20 or 30 years ago would have been unthinkable. But what we often do not talk about is how this kind of technology is a validation of is a violation of our freedom of thought, which is itself an absolute right. So the thought of wanting to detect someone's identity based on data collection is really is really creepy. But this is tremendous impact if it ends up being used in global South countries, where many of these identities are criminalized and even punishable by death, or countries where entities can use this kind of technology to out people, particularly, for example, the LGBT community in many countries in the globe can be identified just by random photos they found online, and this has horrifying impacts to the relationship they have in the society. And that's yeah. Those are just some of the few examples I can think of top of my head, but that's yeah. But that's what I'm saying.
It's interesting that the other thing that fascinates me is that it's not just the data collection of it, data collection and what somebody within an entity, big tech company, whatever it happens to be, is able to use it for. But what happens when somebody either inside or outside of that entity gains access to that intelligence, which we've seen obviously through recent case studies like Medibank and Optus, etc. But yeah, it's the harvesting of data, and then what happens to that data when somebody else who has no entitlement to it on any basis takes it and attempts to do something else with it. And that's a sort of contemporary concern. You are talking later this month at a forum on artificial intelligence. What will you be focusing on when you have a chat with people at that particular forum being convened by Monash Uni?
Yes. So that will be on the 16th of November. We'll be here in Melbourne, and I think on Lonsdale Street where they have their city office. And I will be a commentator. So our panelists will be giving case studies, and I will be able to, well, based on my experience, comment on that, particularly if it's anything about my research on the Rohingya crisis. But I will expound more, pretty much the same thing that I've mentioned in the first part of our conversation, is on how the Rohingya crisis, or cyber propaganda about surrounding the Rohingya crisis, has traveled from the government of Myanmar to the citizens of other countries, and how it became, or it is kind of still is considered an absolute truth by many of those countries, because they're using that as Sam said a while ago, as a tool to legitimize their opinion of Rohingya people. That if Myanmar government say that they are this and this and this and that, why would we in India or Bangladesh want to have them over here, or in their country?
Jean Linis-Dinco is speaking at, and this is a hybrid event, so people can actually register for this and watch it online as well. Just have do a bit of a Google search, Monash University, and how can artificial intelligence combat disinformation. Jean will be talking at that along with a panel of other experts. Jean, where can people see some of your work if they're interested in following up some of the papers you've done?
Yes. I would have said that I am on Twitter, but not anymore. I recently left the site, but I'm still on LinkedIn. Hope that things doesn't change, but I'm on LinkedIn. It's Jean Linis-Dinco. I share a lot of things there. I write a couple of blogs, not just on data ethics and data or tech in general, but I also write a lot about human rights, because that is the foundation of where I am now. And just my name on LinkedIn.
So LinkedIn is where you live after.
Yes, it used to be Facebook. I was very active on Facebook because well, I think everyone was, at least for some time. But after the 2017 Rohingya crisis, which is my main thesis, I've realized how they quite not very active when it comes to the proliferation of removal of hate speech against this particular community. So I thought that maybe I should practice what I preach and maybe I should leave. And then I did. Same went with Twitter, and now I'm just on LinkedIn. And yeah.
Jean, it's been wonderful talking with you and exploring some of these contemporary areas. It'll be great to chat again.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.